This is interview number 1 of case number 1, codename Bottle Mania. The date is June 15th, 2023. Subject, may you please give us your full name for the record?
Atticus Kellum. It's good to be here.
Could you start from the beginning when you encountered object number 1?
Yeah, it's a little hard to say because it's kind of just something that I've been living with for a while and not really thinking about. Um, I want to say at least a handful of months. This little glass jar, sealed with blue wax and some kind of a probably plastic jewel on top, full of what looks like beads and dirty water. Um, just kind of showed up on my front porch doorstep area. I didn't really think anything of it because I've got a lot of friends who are into witchcraft and the occult, but yeah, I didn't mind it for a while. It just chilled there for a few months. I thought it was a neat little decoration. But then I saw another one just like it on campus, on the path past the mods toward the field. I can point it out on an actual map for better specifics. But I I really don't know what to make of it. I feel like there's an equal chance that it's just a kind, helpful spell someone made out of a friendly attempt or something, or maybe it's something more sinister. And I'm really curious to know more about it. If there's any way we can get to the bottom of this.
Have you tried analyzing its contents?
I was poking around a little bit just now. It looks like a lot of I can't tell if they're plastic or ceramic or what, but a number of beads. There's also what looks like a necklace involved in the seal of it. Here it is if you want to take a look. Have you ever seen anything like that?
It's not all too different from other charms I've seen. However, we won't really know what it is until we can do a chemical analysis and understand its makeup, as well as research the symbology behind it. As with these kind of objects, oftentimes the thought behind it matters as much as its makeup. I would also not like to make any definitive statements before doing a proper investigation, as well as getting a look at the secondary item you had mentioned.
That's a good process. That's a great idea. My only qualm is that, well, I really don't know the magical nature of this, and there's no way to tell if opening it will break whatever kind of. I assume it's some sort of a part of a spell. That's my only assumption, but again, I have no idea if it's a good or bad spell. Life has been going in such a strange direction; it would be hard to tell if it was a curse or a friendly magical thing of some sort.
Do you have input from anybody else? You mentioned you had a roommate who was into the occult.
Yeah, my roommate and all my friends with magical interest said they didn't recognize it. No one is really sure what it is that I've talked to.
Anything else you'd like to say on the record before we close here?
Actually, yeah, I did want to say for the record. I don't know if this is related or not. It feels like something of a strangely similar nature. This is gonna sound really stupid and goofy, but maybe 2 or 3 days ago, I went to the parking lot where I was parked, and on the front of my car were two like individual serving size packets of Nilla wafers, both of them open and partially full, just kind of on the right where the windshield wipers are in my car. I took a picture and I can send it to you. Which that just sounds like some tomfoolery right there. But I have no way of knowing if the two things are related or not, or maybe if they are, maybe those are some part of whatever. If this is a spell or curse or something, I am worried it carries some kind of greater supernatural bearing. But yeah, I guess there is a slight chance that people might just be goofing with me, as probably evidenced by the Nilla wafers. So I don't know if this is part of that or different.
A larger part of the prank.
Yeah, or completely separate things.
Well, thank you for your statement. We'll take it from here. Following this interview, we reached out for leads and acquired the second item. This led to the discovery of a third item, as well as a shrine, which allegedly contains even more bottle charms. All efforts to locate the shrine were in vain, as we are unable to locate its exact position due to the complexities of the Evergreen trails. However, the source that made us aware of its existence is very well trusted, so we do in fact believe that the shrine does exist. The shrine would also fall in line with larger narrative of passed down arcane traditions which have been prevalent since Evergreen's inception in 1971. This opens up the possibility that rather than an individual's act, this is part of a larger historical trend that has been passed down through the generations of greeners and into the modern day. Putting conjecture aside, let us discuss the three items that were discovered. Item number 1, as described by the interviewee, is a 3.5-inch tall bottle, designed to be corked rather than screwed, yet somewhat sealed with wax. I say somewhat, as it does have a hole through which liquids can enter and exit. It appears to be accidental, as it is well hid and hard to extract liquid from, but could be purposeful and meant to dump its contents on selected targets. The wax is topped with a pink glass jewel, the likes of which you'd see proudly adorning a child's finger. Its solid innards have been identified to be glass and plastic beads, with the exception of one vexing material, which we are not allowed to extract and analyze due to the constraints set forth by its owner. The unidentified material is a foggy white, akin to that of hot glue. It is tusk-like in structure, and appears to be flexible, although that remains untested. The liquid innards yielded uninspired results, as we are able to determine that it was plain water mixed with the residual rust of the metallic feather necklace that adorns the innards and outer shell of the glass bottle. We were able to determine it was in fact rust through the use of a microscope and a magnet. The microscope let us get a clear view of the compound, undisturbed by the liquids within. The magnet allowed us to determine whether the metal had ferrous metals, which it did, in its hoops and chains, but not in its decorative feathers. For those who do not know, ferrous metal generally has high carbon content, which makes it prone to rusting when exposed to water. With none of our other tests yielding results, we are certain that the internal liquid is just water with the unintended fog of eroded metal, meaning that whatever power the bottle holds, if any at all, is probably more intentional than alchemical. We will explore this further in our conclusion, but first, onto the second item. Visually, it is almost identical to the first item in structure. However, it is slightly shorter, standing at 3.2 inches, but evidently has a wider crevice, which we have measured to be 1 inch in diameter. This bottle remains unsealed, and we believe for good reason, as it contains cinnamon, rose, honey, and a western red cedar leaf, the combination of which makes for a potent and sweet aroma that only becomes stronger as the sun pelts it with its rays. It should be noted that it was hidden in plain sight, right under a lamp, where it stood prominently and was clearly in good condition, with its components being well preserved, indicating to us that it had not been there for too long. Its ornate composition also suggesting it was meant to be admired. The third item was recognizable, but shattered, making any attempt to dissect its components a fool's endeavor. It was clearly a bottle similar in structure to the other two, however its contents and intention were made a mystery by indifference and mud. Not an uncommon fate for the objects left behind by Evergreen's many dreamers, artists, and mystics. Following this investigation, we are left with a few speculations and fewer conclusions, which is only natural when dealing with the echoes of the mind. Much more so when we don't know where they're drawing inspiration from, whether it be Wicca or something more obscure. Usually, we resort to iconography to suss out what well an individual's drawing from, but with no purposeful symbols present, we are forced to use a wider lens. Now, I'm almost certain we're dealing with spell jars, a tradition that dates back several centuries, originating with something that's quite the opposite of what it is today. In the Middle Ages, in the East Anglia region of England, with the ongoing and looming threat of witches and witchcraft, people decided to fight fire with fire, creating the first ever witch bottle, sorcery designed to combat sorcery. The first bottles were made of stone and contained a mixture of any of the following: rusty nails, urine, thorns, hair, menstrual blood, pieces of glass, wood, and bone. The bottles would then typically be buried somewhere near the home, creating what they saw as a snare for anything bad coming their way. And while this practice was very prevalent in the 16th and 17th century, there are similar instances that date back even further. As time passed on, the witch bottle evolved, eventually getting passed down to people of different walks of life and growing in what ingredients it might contain. Ironically, it even got widely adopted by witches, the very thing they were meant to combat in their inception. As more people made their own bottles, they started putting their own spin on it, eventually resulting in something totally different. The spell jar. A spell jar has no strictly defined purpose, as it essentially boils down to intent and ingredients sealed within a bottle to bring about change, and what that change can be is completely within the realm of the creator's whim. All this information does very little to help us give Mr. Callum the answers he seeks. However, it is worth noting, as we all know, corner pieces are key to solving puzzles. Now, with that preliminary information out of the way, let us get to discussing the items individually. First, let us address the item that started this whole investigation. Item number 1. While water is a very common ingredient, not just in spell jars, but all sorts of arcane practices, we can still try to draw some significance from its presence in jar number 1. Now, water is typically seen as a flowing and moving force, but when contained, that changes drastically. While the potential kinetic energy remains, it has been constrained, trapped, which is very fitting for its adhesive properties, which are seldom considered. While we may be able to flow through water, small things like ants, dust, even rust, become ensnared and dragged into a swirling mix, becoming part of a larger whole. This, along with the presence of the shiny beads, makes me believe that it may in fact have been meant to be a probability snare, a fancy term I use for items meant to bring events into being. The beads bring an extremely human element into play, making me believe perhaps it is meant to affect people, or the way something is perceived. I see the feather chain necklace as a binding agent, to tie the maker to the bottle or its effect in some way, which only seems counteractive considering the feathers featured on the necklace, with feathers usually being a symbol for freedom or wind, something with an essence that cannot be easily contained or controlled. However, it can propel things in a direction. If it is, in fact, a probability snare, the presence of feathers and the symbolic weight they carry might indicate that the effect they are trying to bring into being is within the realm of the natural, if not also naturally possible. However, these conclusions are made strange by the fact the bottle was found at Mr. Callum's doorstep, leading me to surmise that the bottle is in fact trying to push into being an event tying, or perhaps you might say chaining, Mr. Callum and the bottle's maker. What that event might be lies heavily on intent, a thing we have no way of knowing. However, bottle number 2 gives us a reason to think love may be in the mix, if the bottles were in fact made by the same person. Beyond this conjecture, I can almost certainly say that Mr. Callum is not being, as he put it, goofed with, and that based on the assembly and components on the first jar, whoever made it is not what one would call a hardcore practitioner. Now moving on to item number 2, which deviates significantly enough that I suspect it may in fact not be made by the same individual, as its contents were more traditional and delicately composed. This feeds into the idea that spell jars might be a wider, greener tradition that is practiced by several students who may in fact pass it down to other students, explaining the existence of the bottle shrine. Now, the odd thing about the second item is that its makeup constitutes common ingredients in love potions and spells, but when used in a spell jar, they are typically either given to the target they wish to draw affection from, or kept to themselves to bring the affection to them. But this one was left out in the open, standing upon a random light post, leading me to believe that perhaps the light post itself carried some significance. Or alternatively, rather than trying to bring affection to a given individual, it may have been meant to affect the general public, more a love bomb than a love arrow. Those are just my hypotheses. What I am certain of is that the components are tied to beauty and attraction, with the exception of the western red cedar leaf, which I think may have just been an aesthetic choice, based on how it was posed in the bottle. Now, as much as I wish I could discuss the third item, it was so thoroughly destroyed, as I said before, that there is not really anything I can say. However, we can infer one of two things from its existence. Number 1, the practice of spell jars is well and live in the Evergreen campus, with a significant amount of practitioners. Or number 2, Evergreen has found itself yet another resident that wishes to mess with the order of things. This time, with bottles. Only time will give us definitive answers as the bottle mania unfolds.